everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel again. I'm Hitesh and I hope you all are doing well. In today's video, we will be covering one of the frequently asked Android interview questions related to Kotlin. That is, what is lateinit and what is lazy keywords used for. So this video is part of my ongoing series on Android interview questions and answers. And you can find the series, the link of the series in the comments below. So without further ado, let's dive into the explanation. So today in the blog, we will be covering what is lateinit and what is lazy properties and what are the differences between both of them. And both of them are very frequently used keywords that we use in the projects. Let's start with lateinit. So in Kotlin, lateinit is useful in a scenario where we don't want to initialize it at the time of declaration, but at a later point in time. However, we have to make sure we initialize it before we use it. So this was the theoretical definition of lateinit keyword. Let's try to understand from an example. If you see, so basically there are always two approaches to define any variable. Either you make the variable as nullable, or you make use of the lateinit keyword. So let's see how it works with the lateinit with the nullable keyword. If you see here in the example, we have a var name string and I've made it as nullable. And of course, it may return the null value or it may not, it may return the actual value. But in case if I want that it should always return the actual value, not the null value, then I can go ahead with the lateinit keyword, right? So this is the another example where I've used the lateinit keyword and I've made it appended here over the var name. So basically I am willing that the lateinit keyword will basically be used and it will not be returning the nullable result. So we should always remember one thing, that whenever we are making use of the lateinit keyword, we should always initialize it with some value before we try to access the object. If you see here in the example, I'm trying to print the length of the name. However, before this line I have initialized it with some variable with value. So if I forget to initialize it, I will end up with an exception which will be lateinit property name has not been initialized. So the tip is, one of the frequently asked questions in Android is, how do you ensure that the lateinit property has been initialized or not? So for that, we can make use of this code where we can add if-else condition. So if will check this dot colon name is initialized. So name is the variable and dot is initialized is used to check if the init variable has been initialized or not. If it is, then we can access the property. And if it is not, then we can assign some value to the variable. So there are things that we should know when we use the lateinit property. First, can be only used with the var keyword, of course, because I want the value to be changed or to be modified at later point in time. So it has to be var. It has to be a mutable property, and of course, I have to ensure that I'm initializing it before I use it. And of course it can only be used with a non-nullable variable. So that means I will be I cannot expect that it will return a null value to me. So this is pretty much about the lateinit keyword. Now let's move towards lazy keyword. So lazy in Kotlin is basically useful in a scenario where we want to create an object inside a class, but that object creation is expensive, and that might lead to a delay in the creation of an object that is dependent on that expensive object. So let's try to understand more clearly with an example. Assuming there's a class session and then there is a variable declared monitor, which basically is assigning monitor class. Now let's assume that monitor class is heavily loaded with a lot of objects and it takes hell lot of time to get initialized, and the creation of session class is completely dependent on the class monitor. So this is very much obvious now that until and unless the monitor class will be initialized completely, the session object will not be created. That means a user would have to wait for a longer time for the session class to be initiated. However, we can avoid this situation by making use of the lazy keyword. And if you see in the below example, the second one, the highlighted one, I've made use of by lazy keyword, right? So well monitor monitor by lazy monitor. That means what I'm trying to do is I'm telling the compiler that don't initialize the class object monitor, because I know that this object is not going to be used initially. So I would want the session class to be initiated at a faster speed, and later whenever I want to access monitor class object, I will initialize it. Because I've made use of by lazy keyword, that means that whenever I will call the monitor object for the first time, then only it will be initialized. So there are things that we should know, when we use lazy property. Can be only used with the val keyword, of course. As I've mentioned you earlier for the lateinit keyword, right? It can be used for var keyword because it has to be mutable, it will be modified. But in case of lazy, the value is not going to be modified. It will remain constant. That means it will be read-only property. When we want to use it only when we want to initialize it for the first time, that is the advantage of lazy property. The recurring calls to that will always return the same object. It will not change. That means, as I've mentioned earlier, first it will initialize when it will be called first time, the monitor object. Second, whenever I will make the repetitive calls, the recurring calls or the subsequent calls to monitor object, it will always return me the same object. It will not change. For example, the best place we can make uses of the lazy property could be when we are creating the retrofit object, or when we are making use of the view model object, where I want that I will call the objects 1000 times in a class, but I want the value to be remain constant every time. So there are two tips. What is the difference between lazy and lateinit keyword, which basically can be asked by any interviewer in for Kotlin Android interview questions and answers. And second, what are the advantages of using lazy keyword? Of course, there is an advantage. The advantage is it helps in memory saving. Yes, indeed it does, because it is not initializing it, it is not loading anything in the memory unless if you call it explicitly and load it. So the verdict for today is we know what are the differences between lazy and lateinit keywords, and we know that where to use both of them. So this is pretty much for today, guys, and that's all for today. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to my channel. If you have any specific questions or topics you would like me to cover in future videos, please feel free to drop a suggestion in the comments. I would be more than happy to create more content for you. Happy learning, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.